Here for another edition of Discover the Joy. We have Dr. Alfredo Quinones-Hinojosa. Did I say that right?
Perfect.
Yes. He is the chair of Mayo Clinic. This is where we are at Mayo Clinic in Jacksonville, the Department of Neurologic Surgery. And not only is what he does so incredible, what is even more incredible is how he got to this point, his life leading up to this. And I can't wait for you to hear that point. But so you gotta stick around for that. But talk to me about what it is that you do in the Department of Neurologic Surgery.
Well, thank you, Joy. I am in the business of giving patients hope. And the tools that I use is a combination of being a brain surgeon and being a researcher. But at the end of the day, I'm in the business of taking care of patients that are going through a journey where they're fighting cancer, mainly brain cancer.
You've been doing this for how long now?
I finished my residency in 2005, and I got my first job, but I came here to the Mayo Clinic towards the end of 2016. So I just completed my 8th year here in Jacksonville, Florida.
And you operate on people's brains while they're awake. How does that work?
It's amazing. Well, I tell you how it works. It works because patients are amazing. Patients are simply amazing. And many times they come in and they have a diagnosis of some sort of brain lesion. And many times there happen to be brain tumors. Many times they happen to be cancerous tumors. And for us to be able to resect as much as possible of the cancer, we need to find out where parts of the brain that are important for language or movement of a limb or the face or something that is of high eloquence, we need to find those things are and leave them intact so that way we can take out as much as possible of their tumor. And I tell the patients at the end of the day is patients' resilience and their ability to imagine what it's going to be like to have their life in the hands of a stranger is what to me is inspiring, because honestly, nothing else compares to that power and that grit that patients have. So you asked me, why is it possible and how is it possible? That's exactly how it happens.
And it's got to be such a scary thing. So not only are you physically operating on their brains, but I would imagine this involves a lot of counseling, a lot of talking to them beforehand, because just the concept of my head being opened and I know this, I would imagine it's very difficult. So how do you walk a patient through that?
I think that this is exactly what makes our service here at the Mayo Clinic so special. They see a neurologist, they see a radiation oncologist, they see a neuropsychologist, a neurosurgeon, a neuroanesthesiologist. You can see tremendous amount. So the counseling begins to happen very early on. But the most important thing right here to consider is that the patient has to feel comfortable with that team that surrounds them.
I've got to ask you why you chose Mayo Clinic in Jacksonville. You, before that, were at Johns Hopkins. Yeah. Even if nobody knows that it's in Baltimore, Maryland, you've heard of Johns Hopkins University, the hospital. That was a big deal. And when you came here to Mayo Clinic, you had huge funding that was being given there. Follow you here, along with people who worked with you, followed you here. So you're a big deal.
Well, thank you for giving me that credit, but I like to say that they didn't follow me. They follow a dream that we had together. And many patients actually continue to follow that dream, and they left Hopkins to get their care here at the Mayo Clinic. And I think that it wasn't that difficult and that challenging for me to leave Johns Hopkins, which was an amazing institution, to come to what I consider to be the premier medical center in the world, which is the Mayo Clinic. Here in Jacksonville at the time, in 2016, we were beginning to dream of growth. And you see the growth now around the campus. You see the cranes, the buildings, amazing dream that we had at the time. And I was sold on this idea that we can create the premier destination medical center in the world here in Jacksonville, Florida. Why? It made it easy for me to decide to leave Johns Hopkins and come to this place. And the people around me, as much credit as you give me to believe that they follow me, we had a dream together. So we follow the dream together. That's the best way that I can describe it.
Well, speaking of dreams, now that we've established how amazing you are and your team, let's talk about your dreams. This was not always part of your plan. When you're a kid, people ask, what do you want to be when you grow up? This, from what I've read, was not your plan. So where did this come from?
Well, I can tell you, I didn't have much of a plan growing up. I was a kid that was very, I got into a lot of trouble because I was inquisitive. I think that's the way that you would put it right now. I was I was an explorer. I got into a lot of trouble growing up with my mom, my dad, my uncles, my cousins, and I helped a lot of people get in trouble with me together because we explore a lot of things. But I think that idea of helping someone, because at the end of the day, once again, you ask me, what do I do today? I help people fulfill their dreams. I give them hope. That idea came very early on from watching my paternal mother, my grandmother, taking care of patients. She grew up in a very small rural community. She never went to school, but she was a midwife and the town healer in a small little place. And town healer, just think about this, obviously. So she knew not a Western medicine, but traditional Native American, Mexican type of, medicine. And I think that I saw her taking care of people, giving people hope. And I saw how people reacted to her. And I got to tell you, she was a challenging, she had a challenging personality. She was very strong. That's my grandmother. And a lot of people, they see me nowadays, you see my face, my hair, my personality. A lot of people see this smiley face all the time, but they know that behind this smiley face is a very strong persona. There's a very driven person who wants to make sure that our patients get the best. And that's how my grandmother was, to be honest with you. And I think I learned that from her. And I saw that early on, and I saw how many people she helped. And I said to myself, maybe one day I'll be able to help people. But never in a million years did I ever think that I was going to go to Harvard Medical School, Hopkins, Mayo Clinic. That came later in life.
Later, but people, I see jaws drop when people realize that you came to this country as a migrant worker. You were working in the fields. Your English wasn't that great, because I know that you took English classes once you got here. But how did you go from that to even starting this journey as this amazing surgeon from the migrant fields?
I always tell people that, it's amazing. I have opened probably over 5,000 brains by now. And I have opened brains from people from over 41 countries, multiple cultures, multiple skin colors. And what I always see that we all have in common is this beautiful organ, which is the brain. And when I open the brain and I look at it with my simple eyes, I can tell the difference between our brains. And that's the beauty about the brain. So yes, it is true that some of us grow up poor, that some of us grow up in countries that are not as developed as the United States. And even within the United States, some of us grow up with less, some of us grow up with more.
You grew up with no running water.
That's true. And it's amazing actually to think that we all have the ability, regardless of where we grow up, we all have the ability to make sure that our brains excel in our dreams, that we can not only execute our dreams, but we can achieve our dreams. And I think that goes back, because you asked me, how did I go from being a migrant farm worker, undocumented, to where I am today, I would say that it was a combination of being driven, uh, having a dream, having faith, seeing light when the rest of the world would only see darkness. And I think those are the same principles that I have today. If you think about the disease that I care for, brain cancer, it's devastating. My patients have a tough, a tough journey ahead of them. I always tell them, I don't know if I'm going to find a cure from you. All I know is that I will be with you on this journey, and I will fight with all my might so that way I can continue to find cures. We are all together in this journey, and that's why I think, as I look back in my many years in this country, I am beginning to understand the power that the American dream has.
And I'm going to take people through that. You said undocumented. You actually jumped the fence. And back then in the 80s, it was very easy, much easier than now.
Yes.
But you are undocumented. You ultimately became an American citizen. Yeah. When you were here working in the fields, you talked about others with you in your journey. You had family members who were working in the fields, got you a job, and then by then there was legislation passed that allowed for people to hire migrant workers.
Correct.
But you still went back and forth to Mexico. So you didn't stay here. Why the back and forth? Why not stay and just take off?
Well, this is the way it works. Most people don't realize that I came for the first time as an undocumented migrant farm worker when I was 15 years old.
15?
I was just a kid.
Wow.
Most people think my life in the United States, they think that it began at age 19, because at age 19, that's when I decided to not go back. But it was momentary at the time. This is 1987, and it was momentary. But the reality is that back and forth is because I was just a kid and I wanted to go back and help my parents. Right. I wanted to take a little bit of money that I was making, bring it back to my parents so I can put food on the table for my siblings, for my parents, who at the time they were going through a lot of struggles financially, emotionally, my father as well. We had lost my little sister just a few years prior from diarrhea, dehydration. That's still the number one cause of death in our developing countries.
And you didn't have medical, there was no medical.
Well, the medical access was limited. We were in the middle of nowhere. It's kind of sad still in developing countries. We know dehydration, diarrhea is the number one cause of death of children. And that's what we experience ourselves. But I think that eventually I decided to stay precisely because that opportunity came by the late 80s. It was not even the amnesty. People think that I was here because of the amnesty. No. The state of California had come up with a law specifically for migrant farm workers to be able to get a working authorization that would allow you to suddenly work legally if you pay a fee and then you demonstrate that you're paying taxes and that you were a good citizen. That temporary working authorization, became a green card. And eventually, by the time I was at Harvard Medical School, became a citizenship in the United States. So that was the trajectory. That's why the back and forth, and that's why I eventually, by the time I decided to stay in the United States, which that wasn't my intention originally, it just came out of necessity. I realized there's an opportunity in this country. All my family members have come and immigrated and they're migrant farm workers. Maybe I can learn English. Maybe I can go to school, community college. Maybe one day I can do something to education. And that's exactly how I went from community college, UC Berkeley, medical school at Harvard, and eventually my residency.
Where did you get the money to do all that?
Well, it's interesting. That's a very good question. A lot of people, of course, I got financial aid through the United States, but I also work. When I was in community college, I work at night. When I was at UC Berkeley, I had two jobs. I was a TA for physics and I was a TA for or organic chemistry and
A
calculus.
TA, a teacher's
Teaching assistant, yes.
So you
You know,
tutored.
I tutor, yes. You know, and I work. I mean, I work up to 40 hours a week when I was at UC Berkeley, and I definitely was working 40 hours a week when I was in community college. By the time I went to Harvard, I got some loans, and I also work in a laboratory. So I work all through school, you know, very early on. But still, despite of all that work that I did and my loans, I graduated with a pretty significant debt. By the time I finished Harvard Medical School and my residency at UCSF, I had over $250,000 in debt. But you know, now I was a brain surgeon. I had graduated from Harvard, UC Berkeley, UCSF, and I was starting my first job at Johns Hopkins. So yes, I had invested in my life. And that I always tell our youth, that is the best investment that you can make. Invest in yourself.
Where did the whole brain surgery thing come in? Because from what I've read, when you started schooling, college, you were an elementary school teacher.
That's right.
So how do you go from elementary school to
brain surgeon.
brain surgeon?
Joy is very well educated. She read a lot.
I was fascinated by your life.
So, you know, it's interesting. So, bottom line, I think that remember what I said about our brains. We all have the ability, if we are willing to compromise, if we are willing to understand that there is a price for triumph. And I always tell people, everybody has the ability and the capacity, most likely, to do great things. Not everybody is willing to compromise and sacrifice. I call that the price of triumph.
It's hard.
It is hard. It's a lot of hard work. And I always tell people that I had a great joy in doing what I do, and I have a great joy in taking care of patients. But it came at a price. I mean, it came at a price of many nights of work, many years in which my children were growing up as I was excelling. I mean, you don't go from being a assistant professor to being a full professor at a place like Johns Hopkins in less than 5 years, unless there's a sacrifice and there's a lot of work. I would say that that is probably the part that I always tell people. We all have the capacity, we all have the ability, but maybe not all of us have the desire to potentially do extraordinary things, you know, in moments in life. I would say that for me, going from an elementary school teacher to being a brain surgeon, it was a journey. And that journey also began, and there was a transition. Remember, when I work in the fields, I was driving tomato pickers, caterpillars, big cotton pickers. These are big machines. I mean, people say one day, one of my professors asked me, so why do you think was similar to when you work in the fields to what you do now, brain surgery? And I said, well, it's quite interesting. You know, when I work in the fields, I used to drive a cotton picker and a tomato picker in which I had to sit on a chair and I had to control all kinds of stuff with my feet, with my hands and stuff like that. And if you see me operating nowadays and you've seen some of my videos, you'll realize that I do that in brain surgery. And maybe what I have even elevated nowadays, I even control my microscope with my mouth as well as I'm looking and I'm moving around the patient. So a lot of the skills now, the stakes, of course, are much higher because now I have a life in my hands as well. But the physical, the mental, the connections, you know, all the knowledge that you must acquire to do the kind of work that I was doing in the fields when I was picking tomatoes and cotton and managing these amazingly dangerous machines, it translated to me in a way that it allowed me to one day begin to use the similar skills to hone my ability to take care of patients in the OR.
You talked about long nights, and I'm just picturing in college working full time and at these amazing universities. Did you not ever want to just give up and go back to teaching, or give up and do something that you could just get started with now? Like, what are those times like? Were you, I mean, because you make it, it almost sounds like they didn't exist. You just drove. And
no, they existed, Joy. They existed so much. And I got to tell you, they exist today. I mean, today, nowadays, every now and then, I operate on Thursdays, and sometimes during the week, I do more surgery. I see my patients 1 or 2 times a week in clinic. But when my patients don't do well, when I have an unexpected outcome, when a patient of mine succumbs to brain cancer, I feel like I am ready to quit many times because the emotional burden of either your patients not doing well or the emotional burden of you did everything you could, use the state of the art technology and knowledge, and yet the disease took the best out of your patients. It's sometimes it weighs heavily, on a soul, on a human being. Those are the moments that I question myself if I want to continue. But then I look around, I see my disciples, I see my team, I see more patients that want to come in and see me. I see their eyes with hope as they see me, and they fill me with that energy that I need to get up and try again. And I think that those are the same moments that happened early on in my career when I was at UC Berkeley. Yes, there were a lot of moments that I felt like maybe I can just get a job, not continue, and medical school, same, residency. I mean, I chose a long residency. I could have chosen a short residency of 2 or 3 years after medical school, but I chose one that was 6 to 7 years.
What pushed you?
What pushed me was simply my desire to do something that felt right in my heart. Everybody said at the time when I was in medical school, maybe neurosurgery is too long, you can choose something shorter. But I felt that that's where I wanted to be. I wanted to touch the brain. I wanted to be part of this journey where I help patients navigate a disease, brain cancer, that it is unmanageable. And I felt my role as a future brain surgeon is not going to be just only the technical aspects of the surgery that I do, but it's also going to be to coach them, to hold their arms and walk with them through this journey of life and death and many times. And I think that that kept me going. And as I said at the beginning, part of it was also faith, seeing light when everybody else is darkness. Because even when I was in resident at UC San Francisco, people say, oh my gosh, you can be a spine surgeon, you can be a vascular surgeon. Why do you want to choose a profession where a lot of your patients, succumb to brain cancer? And I said, because that's what I want to do. I wanted to do it in my own terms. I wanted to do something that I felt that it was important to me. And I also felt that it was going to allow me to connect with my patients.
You don't only do that here. You go outside the country. You will go back home and you perform medical help for people who can't pay for this. Tell me about your nonprofit. Tell me about the work that you do outside this country.
It's organic. I mean, the work that I do outside of the country, and the work that, by the way, the foundation. So we have a foundation. It's called Mission Brain. Mission Brain.
Uh-huh.
And it's amazing. It's in 20, as of this morning, it's in 27 countries, over 100 chapters that are organized around the world. We have over 2,000 members doing work on behalf of the world. And it was just a small seed that I planted back in 2005 to help someone, because I was that someone just 20, 25 years prior. Mm-hmm. And I felt that it was so important for me to go back and just touch someone, just like the way someone touched me when I was a little boy. Alrighty. And I felt that if I can do that for someone else, maybe I can inspire someone else to one day do what I do today as well. So it came out of necessity. And it came out also of my own desires to change the world. I cannot believe that we cannot change the world. The world is telling you cannot change the world. Everybody, every day in the news, and you're in the news, you hear devastation after devastation. Very few stories like what you're doing right now and trying to, make sure people know that you can change the world. And I feel like I want to change the world. You know what I mean? So now the foundation is all over the world. They're touching the world.
What do you do for people outside?
It's both. It's outside of the United States. We're helping poor people. students right now, young doctors are going into communities, they're touching patients, they're helping patients, they're doing exams. Started with brain surgery, continues with brain surgery because that's what I do. But I can only do 5 or 6 surgeries every time I go somewhere. But the people that we have planted, the seeds that we have planted around the world, they're touching patients almost every day. So last year alone, we touched over 10,000 patients around the world, 10,000 people around the world, 10,000 families around the world. That's the work that they are doing. I continue to travel and I do my 5 or 6 surgeries every time I go somewhere. And the Mayo Clinic believes in this and they support me. They encourage it. And it's amazing, actually. But I think that what is amazing outside of the United States, there's a whole group of people that are touching people around the world. And inside of the United States, we also have about 25 chapters at many universities where now our youth, our young doctors are also going into the communities, just like I am going to be doing in November. I'm going to be here in Jacksonville. I'm going to go into our communities and do what I was doing at Hopkins, and I had to pause for a little bit because we had to grow the department, the institution. Now I go and I tell our young kids who have never met a doctor, even though they live in the United States, but they may be in areas that may not necessarily be able to touch someone like myself. So I encourage our chapters in the United States, go to our communities. I challenge you, just like I challenge myself, so that way we can build bridges and encourage and inspire the next generation of our own people in America to continue with their education.
I'm not the only one who thinks you have an incredible story. So does Brad Pitt. Could you please tell me what is the deal? He's trying to make a movie about you?
I knew you were going to ask me about
yeah.
that.
Well, of course.
So this is interesting. I always tell, so Brad Pitt with Jeremy Kleiner and Didi Gardner, they are the owners of Plan B, their company. They've done amazing movies, Big Short, Selma, Minori, Moonlight. I mean, these are Academy Award winning movies, right? They're unbelievable. They done a lot of work. They done a few scripts, but they're perfectionists. And so people ask me, don't you want the movie to come out soon? And I wish there was a movie that would come out about a discovery that I do in the laboratory or the mission work. I mean, I am honored that they're doing something about my life, and I understand it because it's, as you said, it can inspire our future generations. But I have no control. They are working on the scripts. They've done a few scripts. I have no idea. If you ask me who's going to play me, I have no idea. If you ask me when the movie is going to come out, I have no idea. But I know what I was going to say to you. I let them do their thing. And one day they were asking me for advice. And I told Jeremy, it's like, I wouldn't ask you for advice about brain surgery. So because you don't know much about brain surgery, I said, I don't know much about movies. You are the expert in movies. You decide what you're going to do. So it's in their hands. So I'm very honored that they're doing this. But my dream is one day that we make a movie about a discovery, about a cure that we find.
I have one more question for you. And this is for anyone who's driven. I've been very driven in my career and made choices that have not shot me off in my mind to the stars because of family, because of, you mentioned going and sacrificing and going, and you kind of alluded to it about how you became from a associate professor to a full professor in such a short amount of time. Do you have any regrets?
100%. I would say, and just this morning, I was with the chair of orthopedic surgery, Peter Murray, and he and I were just talking this morning. He's an amazing orthopedic surgeon, and he asked me, "How do you do it?" I have 3 kids. My oldest one is in Washington D.C., and my 2 youngest ones are here in Florida. But the youngest one is 19. The middle one is 22, and my oldest one is 25. And I sacrifice so much from them and my wife and my parents and my siblings. I think as I look back in my own life, I probably would have taken a little bit longer to do all those the academic accomplishments that I did, the career successes that I have had, the books that I wrote. I might have taken a little bit longer to do so. and maybe I could have taken a little bit, more time and going to their baseball games, to their swim practice and things like that. Yes, I have regrets, and I have regrets that I can't change the things that I did in the past, and I get it. So now, my own way of trying to, you know, um, figure out how can I spend the next few years of my life, you know, um, spending time with my family, with my children. How do I continue to satisfy my own desires to change the world? Because it's not like they die.
Yeah.
You still have them, but at the same time, I want to spend time with my family, with my children. So I am at that phase in my life. This is why you asked me about the movie, you asked me about Mission Brain. I have learned to pause. I have learned to say no to many things. I have learned over the last 2 or 3 years how to really focus on the things that really matter to me. It's interesting because it's almost going in a full circle, because I grew up in a very strong family with mom and dad, even though we were very poor. And I'm going back to those roots that I had as a little boy, with my own children, with my wife, with my kids, with my parents. Life is a circle, it's a journey.
So you're rediscovering that joy.
I am rediscovering that joy, and I would say that it does help to be at a place where I am today, the Mayo Clinic, because I think that the Mayo Clinic, with the way they care for patients, it allows you to reflect on the things that really matter in life. In caring for patients, which is what I do today. So it's interesting because I'm also the dean of research. I have my own laboratory. I started companies, but I would say that the thing that this institution values most about me is my ability to care for patients, and that keeps me grounded to the floor. And that's been one of the greatest blessings about moving to this institution.
Is that the advice you give for people?
I always tell
To
my
balance
students,
it.
I tell my young doctors and my colleagues, stay focused on the things that matter. Yes, sometimes you want to get this paper out, this book, this award, and there's a time and place from time to time. But at the end of the day, care for patients, feel in your heart that you care for them, connect with them, and everything else is going to play out.
Dr. Q, thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.